Hi everyone. Today Sophie and I will tell you something more about punctuation and relative clauses in the English language. Have fun watching.
Alright, let's start with the punctuation. We use punctuation to structure and organize our writings. It allows us to create sense and clarity and you can use punctuation to stress some things in your sentences. The most used punctuation marks are the question mark, the exclamation mark, the period or the full stop, and the comma. Moreover, we also have the colon, the semicolon, the quotation mark, the apostrophe, the hyphen, the dash, the parentheses, and the brackets. In this short video, we will only discuss the most used punctuation marks as they are of most importance. Let's start off with the period. We have three important rules to keep in mind when we want to use the period or the full stop. The first one is use a period at the end of the complete sentence that is a statement. For instance, I'm going to walk with the dogs, period. The second rule, if the last item in the sentence is an abbreviation that ends in a period, do not follow it up with another period. Let's take an example for this. We use the word etc. We just use it as an abbreviation like etc. And after etc there always comes a full stop. But when it's at the end of the sentence, we don't use two full stops. We only just use one. For instance, in this sentence, I'm going to the supermarket to get cheese, eggs, milk, etc. And you only use one full stop. The third rule is the question marks and explanation points replace and eliminate periods at the end of a sentence. So you don't use an exclamation mark and a period at the end of the sentence. It's either one of those. The second punctuation mark where I want to talk about is the comma. It's a very important mark, but people tend to use it wrong very often. The comma indicates a smaller break within a sentence. Two important things to keep in mind before I go to the rules. Do not put a comma between two nouns and do not put a comma between the subject and the verb. Alright, let's start with the rules. We have 6 important rules to keep in mind when we want to use or do not use the comma. The first one is use a comma before any coordinating conjunction. A coordinating conjunction can be words like and, but, for, or, nor, and so. Those words, if you look at those in a sentence, there's always a comma before you use those words. For instance, in this sentence, I went to the city, comma, and I saw a dog. You don't never use I went to the city and, comma, I saw a dog. You always put it before a coordinating conjunction. Alright, the second rule. Use a comma after a dependent clause that starts a sentence. A dependent clause is a grammatical unit that contains both subject and verb, but cannot stand on its own. Example of a dependent clause is when I went to the city. There's a subject in it and there's a verb in it, but it doesn't say anything about really special. It cannot stand on its own. It's not a full sentence. If we want to make this sentence full, we first have to use a comma and then have the last part of the sentence. For instance, in this example, when I went to the city, comma, I saw a dog. Then rule number 3. Use a comma to offset appositives from the rest of the sentence. Appositives, like nouns that tell more about the subject but aren't that important, has to be set apart from the rest of the sentence with a comma. Look at this example. When I went to the city, comma, I saw a dog, comma, a brown-haired husky. In this example, a brown-haired husky is an offset appositive. It's not something really important, but it brings something extra to the noun. But we set it apart with a comma. Alright, rule number 4. We use commas to separate items in a series. For example, this sentence. When I went to the city, comma, I bought new jeans, comma, a jacket and sunglasses. So I used a comma between new jeans and a jacket because it's a series of things I bought new. Alright, then rule number 5. Use a comma after introductory words, like at first, finally, firstly, secondly. You always use a comma and then repeat the rest of the sentence. For example, at first, comma, I wanted to buy new shoes. Then the last rule, rule number 6, use a comma when the first word of a sentence is a freestanding yes or no. So when the sentence really starts with yes or with no, you use a comma and then put the rest of the sentence behind it. For instance, yes, comma, I bought a new jacket. The third punctuation mark is the exclamation mark. You use the exclamation mark at the end of an exclamatory sentence. A sentence that expresses a strong or forceful emotion, such as anger, surprise, or joy. Have a careful look at the emotion or tone you want to bring over to the people who read your blog. Because, let's have a look at this example. For instance, I can't believe you threw me a surprise party. Behind this tone, you won't use an exclamation mark because she's not excited. She's like, oh, I don't want this party. When you put it another way and you bring it like this, I can't believe you threw me a surprise party. Then you use the exclamation mark. So have a good look at the emotion you want to bring out to your readers. Alright, and then we have the last punctuation mark is the question mark. We have three short rules when we use the question mark. The first one, use a question mark only after a direct question, like, are we going to the city now? Question mark. The second rule, pay attention to the common trap of using question marks with indirect questions, which are statements that contain questions. Use a period after an indirect question. An example of an indirect question is, I wonder if my sister will still join me with going to the city. It sounds like it's a question, but it's indirect because you don't really ask somebody to give an answer to that. If you turn it around and you put a sentence like, I wonder, will my sister go with me to the city? Then you have to use a question mark. And at last, the third rule, some sentences are statements and demands in the form of a question. They are very rhetorical questions. They don't require or expect an answer. Write them without a question mark. So when I say to somebody, why don't you take a break? It's not a question. I don't expect an answer. It's just something I want to say to somebody. So really have a close look at what emotion and what you want to ask somebody or not.
Now we will talk about relative clauses. And first we take a look at the function of these relative clauses. What do they do exactly? Relative clauses give extra information. And we can divide the relative clauses in two types. We have defining relative clauses and non-defining relative clauses. Defining relative clauses give essential and indispensable information, and you cannot just take it away out of a sentence. Defining relative clauses are in the middle or at the end of a sentence, and you don't use any commas. For example, he is the doctor who helped my grandmother. Who helped my grandmother at the end of the sentence is the relative clause. As always, starting with a relative pronoun, in this case it's who. It is essential and defining information about the doctor. Therefore, it's a defining relative clause. In some case of a defining relative clause, you can skip the relative pronoun. This is if the relative pronoun is who, which, that, or where. For example, I can't find the book that I was reading. You can make it into a sentence. I can't find the book I was reading. You skip the relative pronoun that, and it's still a correct and complete sentence. Non-defining relative clauses give trivial information. It is not necessary to put it into the sentence. Non-defining relative clauses are in the middle or at the end of a sentence, and you do use commas. For example, Sophie, who is a friend of mine, lives in Loenen aan de Vecht. If we take out the non-defining relative clause, the sentence will still be correct and complete. Sophie lives in Loenen aan de Vecht. Therefore, who is a friend of mine is the non-defining relative clause. We hope you learned a lot with this video. We had a lot of fun making it, and we would like to see you soon after all the corona madness. Stay healthy!